You're being overly sensitive about this, Marissa. Can't you take a joke? Lucas laughed, his voice ringing through the elegant dining room of Castellanos, one of Charlotte's priciest restaurants. I sat there, cheeks hot with embarrassment, as nearby diners turned to look our way. My boyfriend of 2 years and his best friend, Damon, had spent the past hour making snide remarks about my career. But this latest jab landed like a slap. My name is Marissa Clark. I'm 32 years old and work as a senior marketing coordinator for Crimson Harbor Group, a thriving advertising agency in Charlotte, North Carolina. Just 3 days ago, I'd received the promotion I'd been chasing for 18 months. I was so thrilled, I suggested to Lucas that we celebrate at the best restaurant in the city. What I hadn't expected was for him to invite Damon, and I definitely hadn't expected them to spend the entire night tearing me down. I mean, seriously, Damon said, sawing into his 40 steak that I was paying for. Marketing coordinator sounds so fancy, but isn't it just making flyers and posting on social media? My little sister does that for her high school drama club. He smirked and took another bite, clearly enjoying himself. My stomach dropped. This was supposed to be my celebration, a night to share my joy with someone I thought loved and supported me. Instead, I watched Lucas nod along to his friend's cruelty, his eyes gleaming with amusement instead of the pride I'd hoped for. Actually, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, my new role involves developing comprehensive marketing strategies for major corporate clients. I'll be managing campaigns worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and leading a team of 12. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, a glass that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Lucas rolled his eyes. Come on, babe. You're not running a Fortune 500 company. Let's be realistic about what you actually do. Sanin. The condescension in his tone made my chest tighten with anger. I glanced around at the glittering chandeliers, the soft piano music, and the couples genuinely enjoying each other's company. The bitter truth wasn't lost on me. I was the only one at our table with a steady income. Yet I was the one being treated like my accomplishments meant nothing. Something cold and resolute settled inside me. I'd met Lucas 2 years ago at a coffee shop near my apartment. He was charming, handsome, and confident in a way that immediately drew me in. Back then, he said he was between opportunities after leaving his sales job. I didn't know then that between opportunities would become his permanent state. Over the past 2 years, Lucas drifted from one failed venture to another, a short-lived attempt at personal training, an even briefer stint selling insurance, and most recently, a podcast idea he hadn't touched in 3 months. Meanwhile, I'd been steadily climbing at Crimson Harbor Group. Starting as a junior marketing assistant, I worked late nights, took on extra projects, and built strong client relationships. My efforts paid off. I became marketing coordinator last year and now senior coordinator with a significant pay raise and leadership responsibilities. Remember when you used to help me with my bills? Lucas said now, stabbing at his asparagus. Now you act like you're some corporate exec. It's funny how seriously you take yourself. Damon grinned. Right? You've got a job, but let's not act like you're changing the world with your little marketing campaigns. I thought about every time I'd covered Lucas's rent, bought groceries, paid utilities, and picked up the check without making him feel bad. I'd supported his dreams, even when they were unrealistic, believing we'd eventually be true partners. You know what's best? Lucas went on. She actually thinks this promotion makes her better than us. He looked at Damon knowingly, and my blood ran cold. I realized Lucas didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a meal ticket. My success wasn't something to celebrate. It was something that threatened him. The waiter arrived, smiling politely. "How's everything this evening? Can I get you anything else?" "Yeah," Lucas said without looking at me. "Another bottle of the expensive wine." When it arrived, a 90 Bordeaux, he poured himself and Damon generous glasses, barely filling mine. The entitlement in that gesture hit me like a punch. "You know what I think?" Damon said, leaning back. "Marissa's gotten too big for her britches. Success has gone to her head." "Oh, absolutely," Lucas laughed loudly. "Remember when she used to be fun? Now it's all work, work, work." Something in me snapped. Here I was, paying for what would likely be a 500 bill, treated like an inconvenience. Lucas leaned in, louder now. "Someone should remind her she's still just doing busy work. Making PowerPoints isn't brain surgery." "Das," Damon added, "and she's moody just because we're having a little fun. If you can't take a joke, maybe you should just go home." Lucas looked at me, expecting me to shrink, laugh along, and stay in my supportive girlfriend role. But I saw him clearly now, resentful, insecure, and willing to humiliate me to feel bigger. "You know what?" I said, calmly setting down my wine glass. "You're right. Maybe I should go." His smirk faltered as I reached for my purse. "Wait, what are you doing?" "Taking your advice," I said evenly. "If I can't handle your friendly teasing, I'll just go home." I set 30 on the table, enough for my wine and a generous tip. The rest was theirs to figure out. "Marissa, come on." Lucas reached for my arm. "We were just joking." I pulled away. "No, Lucas, you meant every word. Tonight was just the first time you felt comfortable saying it out loud." Damon shifted in his seat. "Hey, maybe we just got carried away. Why don't we order dessert and call it even?" "Call it even?" I laughed. "You spent the night mocking my career and success. Dessert won't fix that." Turning to the waiter, I said, "These gentlemen will handle the check. I'm leaving." Lucas's face paled. "You can't just leave us." "I don't have that kind of money. My card's maxed from podcast equipment." "That's a personal problem," I said, standing. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe call your boss for an advance." "Oh, wait. You don't have a boss." "Connor Snow." Damon's eyes widened. "Let's just talk like adults." "We are," I said. "Adults take responsibility for their words. Tonight, you both chose to insult me. Now you can choose how to pay for dinner." Lucas whispered, "You're embarrassing me." "I'm embarrassing you?" "You've been humiliating me for 2 hours. Now it's my turn to walk away." He tried to spin it. "You're ruining 2 years over one dinner." "No, Lucas, you ruined it. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen." The check came, $567 plus tip. I knew Lucas had less than 200 to his name, and Damon wasn't much better off. "Well," I said cheerfully, "maybe they'll let you wash dishes." Lucas stared at me in disbelief. "You're not really leaving, right?" "Oh, I am," I said, turning toward the door. "Whether you call your parents or grab a sponge is up to you." As I walked away, Lucas's voice grew desperate. "Marissa, you can't just walk away from this from us." I turned once at the hostess stand. Actually, I can. From someone who sees my success as a threat. From someone who humiliates me in public. From someone who expects me to fund his life while he gives nothing but criticism. The hostess gave me a quiet nod of approval as I stepped out into the cool October air. For the first time in months, I felt free. The walk to my car was light, each step taking me further from years of excuses and minimizing his failures. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Lucas and 1 from Damon. I blocked them both. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine at home and began crafting social media posts. Not angry rants, but thoughtful reflections about self-worth and refusing disrespect. The next morning, My inbox was full of support friends, colleagues, even strangers sharing similar experiences. By lunch, my friend Allison called. "Girl, we've all been waiting for you to see what we saw. He was draining you dry." Later, my coworker, Matt, stopped by. "You'll love this," Damon called in sick today, because apparently he and Lucas spent 4 hours washing dishes at Castellanos to pay off the bill. I laughed. 4 hours for 600? Not very efficient. That evening, I got a message from the hostess. "What you did last night was the most epic response to bad behavior I've ever seen. You're my hero. Lucas kept trying to reach me all week, but each ignored call confirmed I'd made the right choice." Word of the dinner spread. Mutual friends distanced themselves from him. Damon lost his job, and both were left facing the consequences of their disrespect. Walking away from that table wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about valuing myself enough to demand the respect I deserve in every part of my life. And looking back, Lucas's suggestion that I should leave had been the best advice he'd ever given me. Thing he ever did for me. Because walking out of that restaurant wasn't just about dodging a 567 check-it, was the moment I finally severed myself from years of emotional and financial imbalance. The days that followed were liberating in ways I didn't expect. My mornings no longer began with Lucas's constant complaints about how hard it is to catch a break, or his passive-aggressive remarks about my schedule. Instead, I woke up energized, poured my coffee, and looked forward to work, really looked forward to it, without the weight of his resentment looming over me. At Crimson Harbor Group, my promotion began to feel even more significant. My team respected my ideas, my strategies were already gaining traction, and for the first time in a long time, I was surrounded entirely by people who valued my contributions. The contrast to what I'd left behind was stark. Lucas didn't vanish quietly. Over the next week, even after being blocked, he found ways to send messages through mutual friends, fake social media accounts, even an anonymous email. They all followed the same pattern. A weak attempt at guilt-tripping, followed by defensiveness, and ending with accusations that I was overreacting or throwing away something special. But what we'd had wasn't special. It was lopsided. And the truth is, I'd been holding the entire thing together on my own, while pretending it was mutual effort. Mutual friends began to piece things together as more details surfaced. The image Lucas had carefully maintained, that of the charming, confident man, just waiting for the right opportunity, crumbled quickly when people realized how he'd treated me. A few friends reached out privately to say they wished they'd spoken up sooner. Meanwhile, Damon, who'd always been Lucas's shadow, wasn't faring much better. After losing his job for calling in sick to wash dishes, he tried joking about the restaurant incident, as if it had been some hilarious misunderstanding. But people weren't laughing. In our social circles, word traveled fast, and the story was no longer in his control. The best part? I didn't have to lift a finger for any of it. Their reputations unraveled on their own. One Friday night, about 2 weeks after the breakup, I went out for drinks with Allison and a few coworkers. Halfway through the evening, Allison leaned over and said, "You know Lucas is here, right?" I glanced toward the bar and saw him standing awkwardly near the entrance, scanning the room until his eyes landed on me. He started to walk over, but the look on my face must have been enough, because he stopped, hesitated, and turned toward the exit instead. I didn't feel anger or sadness, just nothing. And that nothingness felt incredible. By the time November rolled around, I was deep into planning my first major campaign in the new role. My days were busy, my nights were peaceful, and my life finally felt entirely mine again. Lucas had once told me that without him, I'd lose balance. The irony was, leaving him had been the only thing that restored it. And as for Castellanos, well, I've already booked a table there for next month. Only this time, I'll be surrounded by people who celebrate my wins instead of trying to dim them. The reservation at Castellanos was for a Friday night, exactly 1 month after that disastrous dinner. I arrived wearing a deep emerald dress I'd been saving for a special occasion. My hair was swept up, my confidence shining in a way it hadn't in years. This time, I wasn't there to feed anyone's ego or bankroll someone else's evening. Allison and 2 of my closest friends from work were already waiting at the table. The second I sat down, a bottle of champagne was popped, the crisp sound echoing like a declaration. This night is mine. The hostess, the same one from that night with Lucas and Damon, recognized me immediately. She smiled, leaning in just slightly as she set the menus down. "Good to see you again," she said, her voice warm but carrying that subtle note of, "I remember exactly what happened here." It felt like closure in the best way possible. Dinner was everything the last one hadn't been. Laughter, genuine conversation, and the kind of encouragement that fills you up instead of draining you. My friends toasted to my promotion, to my strength for walking away, and to the fact that I'd managed to turn a humiliating night into something empowering. Halfway through the evening, as I was describing a new client project, I caught sight of 2 familiar figures entering the restaurant. Damon first head down, scanning the room, and then Lucas. I almost laughed at the coincidence. They hadn't seen me yet, but the second Lucas's eyes swept across the dining area and landed on me, I saw the flicker of recognition and discomfort. He froze. Damon followed his gaze, his expression tightening. I turned back to my friends without missing a beat, raising my glass in mid-conversation. My laughter was genuine, and it must have been obvious to them that I wasn't rattled in the slightest. A few minutes later, I saw them being led to a small table in the far corner. Lucas kept glancing over, as if waiting for me to storm out or give him some kind of attention. He didn't get either. At the end of our meal, when the check came, Allison slid her card across the table. "You've paid for enough dinners in your life. This one's on me." It was such a simple gesture, but it made my chest tighten with gratitude. I realized that this mutual care, respect, and generosity was what real friendship and partnership looked like. As we left, the hostess caught my eye again. "Another great evening?" she asked softly. "The best," I said with a smile. I walked past Lucas and Damon without acknowledging them. Lucas opened his mouth like he might say something, but I didn't even slow my step. Outside, the night air felt cool and light. It struck me then that I hadn't just walked away from them that first night, I'd walked towards something better, and I was never looking back. The weeks after that second dinner felt like a quiet, steady upward climb. At work, my first major campaign as senior marketing coordinator launched ahead of schedule, and early analytics showed engagement numbers higher than any in the past 2 years. My director called me into her office one afternoon just to say, "You're exactly what this department needed." Outside of work, my life was blissfully free of the constant tension Lucas had brought. I no longer dreaded hearing my phone buzz, wondering what crisis or complaint he'd unload on me next. My evenings were mine, sometimes spent out with friends, sometimes curled up at home with a glass of wine and a good book, sometimes just enjoying the quiet. Lucas still tried, in his own clumsy way, to worm back into my life. A mutual acquaintance mentioned that he'd been telling people he just wanted to explain what happened at Castellanos, as if there were some hidden angle that would suddenly make his behavior acceptable. But the more he talked, the worse he looked. People weren't buying it. Damon had all but disappeared from our shared social circles. Word about the dishwashing night had spread farther than I expected. Apparently, It had become a running joke at his old workplace, and a cautionary tale about letting arrogance get the better of you. One Saturday morning, as I was leaving my apartment building with a coffee in hand, I saw Lucas waiting by the curb. He stepped forward, clearly trying to catch me before I could avoid him. "Marissa, can we talk? Just 5 minutes." I didn't slow my pace. "We've already said everything that needs to be said." "You're making me out to be the bad guy," he said, falling into step beside me. "I was just joking that night. Damon was too. You overreacted." I stopped, turned to him fully, and for the first time, I felt no anger, only clarity. "No, Lucas, I reacted appropriately. You spent hours belittling me on one of the most important nights of my career. You did it in public, and you expected me to pay for the privilege." "That's not a joke. That's who you are." He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. "I'm not interested in debating the past. Go find someone who thinks that behavior is acceptable. It's not me." And with that, I walked away. By the time I reached the corner, the only sound was the steady rhythm of my own footsteps, and the knowledge that each one carried me further into a life where I chose respect over excuses. For the first time in years, I truly felt untouchable. By December, the sting of that October night had completely transformed into something else, a quiet sense of pride. I'd redecorated parts of my apartment, rearranging my living room to make it feel more open and inviting. Friends came over more often, and our evenings were filled with warmth and laughter instead of tension and snide comments. My home finally felt like it belonged entirely to me. The holiday season at Crimson Harbor Group was busy, but in the best way. My team surprised me with a small celebration complete with cupcakes and a card signed by everyone to thank me for how smoothly the last quarter had gone. I kept that card pinned to my corkboard at home. Lucas was nothing more than background noise by then, though every so often a trace of him would surface. One night, Allison sent me a screenshot of a vague, self-pitying post he'd made on social media about being betrayed by people you thought would be there forever. The comment section was full of sympathetic replies from people who didn't know the real story. I didn't respond. I didn't even feel the urge to defend myself. Because the truth was, my life had already moved on, and it was better without him. In late December, Castellanos announced a New Year's Eve charity gala. The hostess, who had since become something of a friendly acquaintance, sent me a personal message. "You should come. I'll make sure you have the best table in the house." I went. The restaurant was glittering that night, crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished silverware, live jazz playing in the corner. My table was near the front, close enough to see the band, with a perfect view of the dance floor. Halfway through the night, as champagne glasses clinked and the countdown to midnight loomed, I noticed the familiar silhouette by the bar. Lucas, alone. He wasn't dressed for the occasion. No suit jacket, no tie, just standing there with a drink in his hand, scanning the crowd. For a brief moment, our eyes met. But this time, there was no hesitation, no lingering. I simply turned back to my table, smiling at something Allison said, and didn't look at him again. When midnight came, I toasted with my friends, the room filled with cheers and laughter. The band struck its final note for the year, and I realized something. I had closed out more than just 2025 that night. I had closed out an entire chapter of my life, and I wasn't going to reopen it. The next morning, I woke to a bright, quiet first day of the new year. And for the first time in far too long, I knew exactly what and who I wanted in it. January unfolded with a kind of calm I hadn't experienced in years. At work, I was deep into planning 2 simultaneous campaigns. One for a luxury hotel chain, another for a tech startup that had just landed a massive round of funding. The pace was fast, the expectations high, and I thrived in it. Every meeting ended with nods of approval. Every email I sent seemed to lead to new opportunities. Outside of work, I started saying yes to things I'd put off during my relationship with Lucas. A weekend trip to Asheville with Allison, a pottery class I'd been eyeing for months. Even something as small as a solo afternoon at the art museum felt like a quiet act of reclaiming my time. Every now and then, mutual friends would mention Lucas in passing. Apparently, his podcast idea had fizzled out completely, and he was working sporadic shifts at a bar downtown. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The distance between our lives spoke for itself. One rainy Thursday evening, I ducked into my favorite coffee shop to escape a sudden downpour. It was the same place I'd first met Lucas 2 years earlier, but instead of nostalgia or bitterness, I just felt neutral. While I waited for my latte, I scrolled through my phone and noticed a message request from an unfamiliar account. It was Lucas. Again, Lucas. I've been thinking a lot about that night. I know I screwed up. I miss you. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then pressed delete. No response, no dramatic exit, just the quiet click of a door closing for good. That weekend, I hosted a dinner at my apartment. It wasn't anything extravagant, homemade pasta, fresh bread, a few bottles of wine. But the energy in the room was completely different from that night at Castellanos. We ate, we laughed until our cheeks hurt, and at the end of the night, my friends all insisted on helping clean up. As I stood in my kitchen afterward, hands in warm soapy water, I realized something. The real victory hadn't been walking out of that restaurant months ago. The real victory was building a life where I never had to sit at a table like that again. By February, that truth had settled into me so completely that it felt like second nature. Valentine's Day came and went without a second thought. Instead of dreading some half-hearted, last-minute gesture from Lucas, or worse, having to fund my own celebration, I spent the evening exactly how I wanted. Cooking a beautiful dinner with Allison, drinking wine, and watching our favorite old romantic comedies while laughing at all the unrealistic parts. At work, the luxury hotel campaign launched 2 rave reviews. The client sent a handwritten note praising my leadership and creativity, a gesture that reminded me why I loved what I did. My director started dropping hints about me taking on a bigger role before the year was out. The few times Lucas's name came up, it was as distant gossip. A friend of a friend mentioned he'd been spotted at a downtown dive bar, loudly complaining about how women these days only cared about money and status. I didn't flinch, didn't feel the need to defend myself, and most importantly, didn't care. One Saturday morning, while running errands, I passed by Castellanos. The winter sun was spilling across its front windows, the same ones that had looked so sharp and intimidating that night I walked out. Now, they just looked warm, inviting. I stopped for a moment, smiling to myself. That building wasn't a monument to humiliation anymore. It was a reminder of the night I chose myself over someone who couldn't value me. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, planning a spring trip I'd been dreaming about for years. Paris. Just me, my camera, and as much time as I wanted to wander cobblestone streets and sit in little cafes without anyone mocking what I did for a living. Booking that ticket felt like more than just a vacation plan. It felt like proof that I'd stepped out of a small, cramped version of my life and into one I'd built entirely on my own terms. And this time, I wasn't just moving forward. I was running. March arrived with a burst of early spring warmth, and with it, the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something bigger. Work was busier than ever. My tech startup clients campaign had gone viral in ways none of us predicted, and I was suddenly fielding calls from companies I'd admired for years, asking if I might have room in my schedule for them. For the first time in my career, I wasn't chasing opportunities. They were chasing me. In the evenings, I found myself doing things I never used to have the energy for. I joined a weekend hiking group, started a small balcony garden, and even signed up for a photography class to prepare for Paris. Every part of my life felt expansive, like I'd quietly unlocked a bigger version of myself that had been waiting all along. Lucas was nothing more than a faint echo by then. Occasionally, I'd hear secondhand tidbits, how he was working sporadically, how Damon had moved to another city, how the two of them weren't as close anymore. I didn't feel satisfaction, only detachment. Their lives were theirs to live, and mine was finally mine. One evening, after a long but rewarding day, I was curled up on my couch, scrolling through photos from the early planning stages of my campaigns. I landed on one taken the day after that October dinner, a selfie I'd sent Allison, my hair a little messy, my eyes still sharp with the kind of clarity that comes after a hard decision. Looking at it, I realized something important. That night at Castellanos hadn't just been an ending. It had been the moment I'd started living without compromise. And as spring settled in, with Paris just weeks away, I knew the best part was still ahead. By the time April rolled around, the countdown to Paris felt almost as exciting as the trip itself. Work was in a sweet spot. Both major campaigns I'd led were exceeding projections, my team was thriving, and my director had already hinted at grooming me for a managerial role before year's end. My days were full, but for the first time in years, they felt full in the best way. The night before my flight, I stood in my apartment surrounded by neatly packed luggage and the soft hum of the city outside my window. I poured myself a small glass of wine, leaned against the counter, and thought back to that night at Castellanos. I could still picture the crystal chandeliers, the sharp clink of cutlery, the way my cheeks burned at every cruel remark. But more vividly, I remembered the moment I stood up, placed my money on the table, and walked out, not just of the restaurant, but out of a life that had been shrinking around me. That single choice had led me here, to a place where my worth was non-negotiable, where my days belonged to me, and where my future felt wide open. As I zipped up my suitcase and set it by the door, a wave of calm certainty washed over me. Whatever came next, Paris, the new role, the unexpected twists, I'd face it all knowing I'd already done the hardest part. I'd learned how to leave what didn't serve me, and I'd never settle for less again. Paris greeted me with golden morning light, the scent of freshly baked croissants, and the soft hum of conversations drifting from sidewalk cafes. I walked through the narrow streets of the Latin Quarter, feeling as if the city was quietly absorbing the rhythm of my new life. At a small corner cafe over a cup of strong espresso, I pulled out a notebook that had been gathering dust on my shelf. I used to jot down project ideas, notes about books, and small dreams I always postponed. Now, the pages began to fill with plans bold, vibrant, unapologetic, free from anyone else's expectations. At the next table, an elderly couple held hands, laughing at some private joke. I caught myself thinking that one day I wanted that too. A partnership where there was no room for jealousy or belittling, only respect and genuine joy for each other's successes. My phone rested quietly beside me, free of the numbers that once carried the power to ruin my day with a single notification. I took a sip of coffee, smiled to myself, and wrote one final line in my notebook. The most important decision I've ever made was to choose myself. Everything else now lies ahead. Paris went on with its life, and so did I. And in this new life, there was no longer any space for those who had ever tried to make me smaller than I am.